Greetings, everyone. We're here to look at Datera's VCP. That's the vCenter plugin for our storage. We're just going to look at the features in 1.5. We'll do an overview first, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time, a little bit extra time on the health check feature, which is new in 1.5. The main purpose of the VCP, automate some of the common tasks that you would do, which essentially amounts to creating a data store. Manually, you would have to create the data store, set up some configuration, and create the volume on the Datera node separately. And that's a manual workflow. So we automate creating a data store. Deleting a data store is the opposite. You need to tear down the data store on the ESX side and then tear down the volume on the Datera node. So we automate that one. We also automate snapshots, where you can take a snapshot of Datera volume, and you can also create from the snapshot a new data store on vCenter. And the last thing that we do is there's a variety of configuration options that need to be set on ESX for optimum for the Datera data store to work properly. Some of the configuration options, if they're not set right, will result in reduced performance, and some of them can actually create errors and give you data loss. So we detect all those, and we also offer the ability to fix them on the fly. So that's sort of a summary of what we're going to cover here. And now let's just get right into it. So the first thing that we do is creating a data store. This is our menu. So this is our create data store wizard. We have a large number of options. And you'll notice I started the create data store wizard from an ESX node. It can also be started from a cluster node. And so before I get into it, let me also show what happens. When you create it from a cluster node, it looks the same, but it tells you it's a cluster. And what it's going to do is it will create this data store on all the nodes of the cluster. And before you do that, synchronize is what we call synchronize initiator group. So when we do a cluster, what we actually do is we create an ACL policy on the Datera node that is a group that has each initiator for the various ESX nodes in it. And when we create the volume on the Datera node, we just put that group in the ACL policy. So you can add and remove ESXs from this group, and all this is handled automatically by our VCP. So the really thing to show first here is the synchronized initiator group. It's already been done, actually. It would show here a full description. Let's pick a different name. So now it's going to show you what it would take. You can also switch groups. It warns you you're going to switch groups. So it creates a new group. It's going to add both hosts to the initiator group, and it tags the initiator group with a special thing to say this is associated with this cluster. So if we go back to our original one, say it's already synchronized. So I don't need to actually show it synchronized. So that's the first step. Then the second step, and I'm going to show the cluster one because that's really a superset, and it's essentially identical to the create on ESX operation. So pick a name. Okay. Now we have a bunch of options here. The first one here is this thing called a ping pre-check. This is also done by the health check regularly. We have found that one of the most common errors that people make is when they're creating a data store for the first time. The networking isn't quite set up right between the ESX and the Datera node. You have to have a separate networking setup. It's all documented in our stuff. You can have a single connection or redundant connections. What this will do is actually do a ping. And if it's not set up right, this will detect it. And once you've done it, you don't ever really have to do it again. So if you're creating 4 data stores, you really only need to do the ping tree check the first time. So let's go ahead and do this. So what it's doing is it's pinging the virtual IPs of the Datera node from each of the ESXs that was a candidate for the add. Since it's a cluster, there's actually 2 of them. Okay, so now we go on to screen 2. So these are the first set of options. You can specify the data store size. We have a minimum size of 2 because that's the minimum size that a vSphere data store can be, although it's going to throw an error saying out of space. When you format a VMFS volume, it's going to use up most of those 2 gigabytes. So I actually prefer to use 4 so we don't initially get an error. This replication factor is important to understand. Sometimes it's described as number of mirrors. It's +1. So replication factor is just how many total copies of the data do you have. So 3 means you have the original data plus 2 mirrors. If I select 1 here, then you don't have any mirrors at all. You have 1 copy of the data exactly. And these two features I don't need to describe in detail right now, but they're documented. They are supported through the wizard. Just move on. Next, we have called quality of service. These are basically throttling, a bunch of throttling that you can do on an individual per volume basis that we support. I'm not actually going to enter any numbers there, but it's here. And you can enable anything that you want here. So let's leave that alone. I just want to point that out there. Next is the ability to add snapshot schedules. It's pretty standard. You can have as many schedules as you want, and you can see what the basic options are. We can go ahead and leave a schedule in there though. A couple of interesting things here is that it will propose a start time of 15 minutes in the future from when you're running this wizard. It's not a good idea to do a snapshot schedule in the past. The specific issue is if you take a snapshot while vCenter is formatting the volume, you'll get a snapshot of a data store that's actually not valid. You can't mount it on VMFS. So this was just an attempt to make sure customers don't trip over that. You can revert to a snapshot, then you can't mount, and it can actually, ESX doesn't always handle badly formatted volumes well, so you don't want to go there. Next up after that, we have two sets of advanced options. Datera, the way it's set up is there's actually an app instance, a storage instance, and a volume instance. We do support a hierarchy where you can have multiple storage instances per application and multiple volumes per instance. However, the VCP does not support that. We thought it was a little too complex, a little bit sort of a legacy level complexity. If you just make them all the same, that's simpler. This also allows you to specify an individual name if you want for each one. That's there if you want to do it. This is the one difference between create a data store with a cluster versus create data store through a host. So with cluster, it's automated. You just pick the name of your group in the synchronized string earlier and it's done. But when it's a host, you get a whole bunch of options here. You can manually stick it in a group or manually use individual initiators. And you may notice that this follows the look and feel of standard VMware wizards. That was the point, to make it feel, for VMware administrators to feel right at home with this. We made it look as close as we could. So let's go ahead and create the data store. So what it's going to do is first it creates the volume on the Datera side, and then it proceeds to mount that ESX side. Sorry, we're accidentally seeing health check there, a little preview of it before we're ready. Now it runs as a background task. Actually, it runs as several background tasks. We spawn off quite a few of these because there's a lot of work to create a data store. We automate all this. So you'll see things gradually running, and once it's done, we see our data store appear. Okay, so now I've got a data store, and in the data store management area here, this is a new node. This is the snapshot management page. But before I do that, I promised I was going to show you the create data store from host. Let's go here. I won't finish it, but I'll at least just show you the options. Let's pick a different name. Say nope, because we know that works. And if we go quickly here, now we have a bunch of manual options. We can use an initiator. So you're adding an initiator to the ACL, the permissions list on the Datera node side for this ESX to grant it access to use that volume. You can manually specify whether you want a group, use an existing group, or a new one, and it will manage all this for you. So basically, if you don't want to have a group per cluster, and virtually everybody does, but if you want to strike out on your own and have any manual topology that you want, you can. We support that via this section right there. Okay, so now let's go off to our snapshot page. So a snapshot is essentially an instantaneous thing on Datera, as far as I know. So if we create a snapshot and say, yeah, okay, fortunately, we try to make this a discoverable UI. So there's some interesting stuff that we do with snapshots. So we try to call all this out so that it's just there if you click through it. We try to make sure all the gotchas are visible right there in front of you. Okay, so let's just go ahead and make snapshot. So we didn't do any of that special case I just mentioned. We just created a vanilla snapshot, and boom, there it is. Now, once you have a snapshot, and Datera doesn't actually name snapshots. All you have is a timestamp. So it's good to keep in mind. There is a UUID here. Probably doesn't do you any good, but there it is. Okay, so Once I have a snapshot, you can delete the snapshot. Clone is actually clone a new volume from the snapshot. Let's go see. And it's very clear. It's going to make a new data store. So this is going to do virtually everything that the create data store did, except that you don't get to specify any parameters. It will create a data store that looks exactly like the previous one. All the parameters will be the same. It will be mounted on all the same ESX hosts the original data store was mounted on. Currently, there's no flexibility there. We are planning to add some more flexibility in the future, but that's what it does today. So that's clone snapshot, and you can have more of these if you want. We mentioned the snapshot schedule in the past when you could see in the create data store. So they would show up here, and you pretty much, the way it's set up to do the schedule is you have a rolling queue of snapshots. So the older ones will get deleted and new ones will get created. It's just a quick and easy, very simple type of recovery, data loss recovery there. So that's snapshots in a nutshell. So we showed snapshots at a high level. Next will be the health check feature. You're actually seeing the health check page here right now. So let's talk about health check. What health check does is two things. First of all, you should know that it runs once per hour unless you manually tell it to run. So that's why it's not seeing the volume that we just created. So this is what it looks like. It does use PowerShell to do a lot of its work. So we asked people to install PowerShell on the vCenter. Not everyone's willing to do that. If you don't do that, you get limited health check functionality. It'll check what it can and tell you that it didn't find any errors, but that's not going to have as much meaning as if you have the full functionality. It's really only two checks that it's doing. We have a whole bunch of configuration options that we bundle together under ESX host configuration, and then we do the ping check. So this is the ping check. It'll show you if any addresses failed. We try to document what's going on. This is what you're going to see. If ping fails, you'll actually get an error show up here. By the way, this UI, in case you don't recognize it, is standard VMware UI for health check types things. They have other products that use this exact same interface. So again, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We tried to make an interface that people would be familiar with. So if we're going further, let's give a little bit of overview of health check. The first thing we want to mention, you mentioned that it's hourly. Health check is visible from 4 scopes. There is a global scope, which I wanted to hang off the top node, but I couldn't because the API doesn't let you. So instead, it ends up being here, or you can also find it in the home screen. So you'll see this is the Datera dashboard, which we're also going to show, and this is the health check. And that's the top scope. The other 3 scopes are data center. And so this is going to show a roll-up. So this is a roll-up here, and it's only going to show you the status of what's underneath the particular node that you select. And in particular, the retest button will only test things that are in scope. And also, I mentioned we have a way to automatically configure things if you want. We'll show this in a second. We're going to show this live. But you can reconfigure anything that's wrong, and the ESX thing will automatically reconfigure that for you. Again, that only takes effect in the scope. So if you can see an error at a high level, but if you want to, you can work with just a single ESX host once you're actually troubleshooting an issue. So let's do that. Before I do that, though, I want to back up and show the dashboard. All right, so this is the dashboard screen, which shows you a little bit of metrics. You can see a little bit of other stuff that's going on, some log stuff, and also show you the current volumes that you have mapped. Another thing you can do is we can upload logs. This shows you the Datera nodes that you've got set up. You can have more than one. You can have none of them, and ESX will still work, but VCP then will have some difficulty managing. It'll tell you that, sorry, you don't have a Datera volume set up, you need to put it in. Okay. If you change your vCenter password, you'll need to change it here too. Right now we are using, you need an administrative password. In the future, we're hoping to allow role-based stuff with vSphere. Right now, we don't have that. And then, of course, we have the hello. We tell you what we support, basic about screen. So that's it for the dashboard. Now let's get back to health check. So if you're over here, now I'm going to, at the highest level, I'm going to run retest. The once an hour also comes from VMware. We're just doing what they do so that no one has any surprises if what they're used to seeing, what people are used to seeing with VMware, they'll be seeing with us. So here we go. And we should actually be able to see health check running. There, it's running in the background. And it will take a little longer if you have more hosts. It is parallelized to a point and it's configurable. Yeah, we have 2 hosts, so you can see them both run. There. And now, if we refresh the screen, see, I'm going to have to drop out of full screen briefly. Okay. There. Now we see that it's done. Okay. I was hoping you'll find an error. I will create an error for you briefly. So we see that it worked. Before I create an error, let me just show you what all the possible errors are. So again, in the spirit of self-discoverable UIs, we fully document everything that can be seen. So we talk about what happens. We show you what all the different errors are, which is yellow and which is red. And we also document, these are categorized by where they are in the UI. And down at the bottom, there's a few that can only be accessed through a command line, so we document how to do that. One of the IT people that we were working with was actually using VCP only as a detector. So he was manually fixing everything on his own and using this purely as a detection tool. You're welcome to use it however you like. We will fix things on an automated basis if you like. So now let's go back and simulate an error. So we pick one of these. We'll just pick one. I'm going to go for whatever I can find that's easy. Probably this delayed ACK might be a good one to set. So we should be able to go for a single ESX host. Go over to configure. This was set on the iSCSI interface. Under advanced options, there's an edit button. And you get to edit them all. There, it's right here. So if we turn it on, now this host is no longer in compliance. So if we then rerun health check, actually let's not do this globally. It's better to see it. We'll do it from the cluster level because you'll be able to see what happens. You're going to rerun. Here it goes. We're going to wait. Now what's going to happen is it's going to generate an event, and that hits the event logs, and then we have some alarms that then trigger, and then we should see the status appear here on the host. So that's what we're waiting for. That's why I wanted you to see the host view, why I didn't do it from the global. Also waiting. Okay, so we see got a yellow alert here. Unfortunately, we have to refresh the screen to then see the health check side of things. Okay. So now we see that we have yellow here, and it's going to tell you exactly what's wrong on which host. And if I click on this link, it's actually going to go to a health check view for the host in particular. So now I'm working in this host environment, and let's go look at it. So we have a couple things that we can do here. We can decide we don't want to deal with this. We can just silence the alert, or we can do the reconfigure option. Before I do the reconfigure option, though, I want to show you the chain of events and what the silence alert thing is actually going to do. So if we go to the top level here, we will see that there are a bunch of alarm definitions, and Datera is in here. Let's sort by name. There, we've created 4 alarms, and the reason there's 4, even there's only 2 conditions we check for. Remember, ESX configuration errors and ping check. There's 1 alarm for the yellow state and 1 for the red state. It just happens through the API. That's what you can do. If you look at one of these, this is 6.7, by the way, vCenter. On 6.5, you don't have this option, but at 6.5 and later, you have some very interesting options. There, this is what I was looking for. You can route, and this is all standard vCenter stuff. So the point is here, we hook into vCenter in the standard way so that all the features you're used to with any forms of alerts or alarms work with us as well. So you can attach it to an email notification, SMP, you can send it out to SNMP, or you can do the other options that are available for a standard vCenter alarm. And in case you don't know, I imagine most of you do, but the way alarms work, these alarms anyway, they're triggering off the event log. So then if we go look at the event log, we're going to see that when I ran the health check, it sent a particular event. Okay, and the event type ID is what actually matters. So again, there's four of these to match the 4 alarm states, and this is a user error, user-generated error. And we just send 4 different types here, and they map directly to the 4 different types of the alarms. So now that you've seen how the alarm system works, then what we want to talk about is go back and look at our host with the trouble. I should probably mention one more thing before I go forward. So this you've probably all seen. You get this kind of thing. The acknowledge versus reset to green. Acknowledge is intended so that an administrator can come along and say, okay, I'm working on this. It'll still show as yellow. It'll still be set off in an alarm triggered state. And reset to green actually clears it. If you do reset to green, you would need to then re-trigger a new event in the event log before that would happen. So the workflow that VMware sort of puts out there is somebody comes along, acknowledges it, works on it. Once they have fixed what they believe to be the underlying issue, then they'll do the reset to green. So that's the workflow. So now let's go look at this workflow a little bit. So we're in here, and so we have this error. So I could manually fix that, as some people do, or I can just click reconfigure. But I want to talk about the silence alert thing first. So I remember I was talking through it. It trickles up, the alert's generated, it hits the event logs, and then it hits the alarm. You have 2 options, and this is all VMware standard stuff. You can silence the alert. If you do that, okay, now these events are no longer going to be generated, and we only support, it's global, sorry, it's all or nothing. I just click it, there's no confirmation for turning it back on. But the other thing that VMware supports is at the alarm level. At the alarm level, each alarm can also be disabled. Just want to make that large enough, wide enough so you can see it. So see, there's the error, the warning, the error, the warning. Those are the 4. If you disable an alarm, then it's still going to be in the event logs. It just won't trigger an alert over here. Okay, so that's the difference. Those are your choices. Now let's go back to actually managing it on the host. So we're going to pick the automated reconfigure and just do it. Now, the thing you need to know is even though we have the 4 scopes, when reconfigure is done, it's only going to reconfigure hosts that actually have a configuration error. So it's not a shotgun blast of all hosts. That's something you want to avoid anyway. So what it's going to do is it's going to do the reconfigure while we wait, and then it's going to re-kick off the health check scan just for whatever scope you have selected at this time. If you picked a higher scope, it would reconfigure, as I said, any and all hosts underneath that scope that had errors. So we're just going to go ahead and do this. And we should eventually see the health check task kick off after the reconfiguration is complete. Okay, there it is. There, boom. So now, again, let's refresh the browser. And now we see green. So that's pretty much all for health check, and that's pretty much all for VCP. Hope you find this useful. Thank you very much.